might be wondering, when is the best time for sheep to breed? Well, whether you're new to having dairy sheep or you have another kind of sheep, it's really important to time your breeding of your sheep with the seasons.
Now, before we get right into it, I want to tell you a quick story. So at the end of last summer, we got a storm warning on our phones that said there was a ton of rain and a ton of wind, and even though our sheep have a small shelter outside, we decided to bring them inside to the barn. So I told my husband Robin, don't worry, I'll go and bring the sheep in one group at a time, because we have our female sheep all together and our male sheep all together. Put on my rain jacket, put on my rain boots, and headed out into the dark. At this point, it was already pouring. It was really hard to see and walk out in the pastures, and I let the first group out and they just started hightailing it straight to the barn, and I thought, okay, great. Now I could go back to the barn with them and close the door behind them and come back and get the other group of sheep. Or, me being lazy, I decided to just open the second gate for the other group of sheep, and that's when it happened. So we had our ram start running after one of our ewes, and the two of them ended up outside in the pasture while the other sheep went in the barn like sensible sheep do because it was raining and really uncomfortable. But at this point, we had our ram chasing our ewe, and they were just going around and around, and I was trying to separate them. Now, obviously, this ram was ready to go, and together we were able to separate them and get them back into their separate pens in the barn. Now, why am I sharing this with you? Because you have to be careful, and I don't want you to go through the things that we've gone through ourselves.
I'm Natalie Lucier of Waykeeper Farm and Nerdery, and on this channel, I talk about all things homesteading. So the first thing you need to know about sheep breeding is that it is a very seasonal thing, and it will depend on the breed and the location where that breed developed. So for us here in North America, in our colder regions, we breed in the fall. And the reason for that is because we want to have lambs when it starts to get warm again. As the days start to get shorter, your sheep's biology kicks in, and that tells them that it's time to start getting jiggy with it. There's also a temperature effect, so if it is too hot, that could decrease fertility. So as it starts to cool down a little bit, that also tells sheep that it's a good time to start mating. We personally breed East Frisian and British milking sheep mixes of sheep. It's really important to know how long the gestation period is for sheep, because that can help you plan when to breed and when you'll have lambs. So it's approximately 5 months, or 142 to 152 days. So what you can do is you can pick the time that you'd love to have lambs and then work backwards and reverse engineer from there. So the first thing you want to do is think about when you're ready to put your sheep out on pasture and when there's good grazing for them. And from there, you want to give your sheep a little bit of time to be in a barn or an enclosed and safe area with their lambs before they go out on pasture. That's because the lambs won't quite be ready to graze after they're born. So you want to give them a few weeks with their moms before they're fully out on pasture. So what we like to aim for is about a mid-April to early May lambing.
If you don't want any off-season breeding, make sure you follow your own protocols and stick to them.
Sheep release different types of pheromones when they're in heat and when they're ready to mate. The first thing you'll notice is that your ram will start to curve his upper lip and sniff the air for those pheromones. And the females, when they're in heat, will usually pee in front of a ram to let them smell their pheromones. What you want to do is keep them in for 2 cycles, which is about 5 weeks, just to make sure that the ram has a chance to catch them at that right part of the cycle. So how many ewes can a ram service? Well, he can service between 3 and 4 ewes per day. When we first brought our sheep on the farm, we weren't sure whether we should breed the young female ewes that are born the same year that they're born, or if we should wait until they're 1.5 years or 2 years old. And the answer will really depend on how you plan to manage and what resources you have on your farm. So for us, we realized that we don't want to breed the first year on those really young female lambs because of a situation that we had this past year. So we decided to go ahead and breed our youngest, Jubilee, and she had twins. She lambed great on her own, and she was fairly big by the time we had her bred. But we realized that she was just not as good of a mom, and because we're not set up here on the farm to take care of young lambs full time, and this is definitely a homestead, we realized that she was not taking good enough care of her runt. And this was a much smaller lamb, and she was having a hard time drinking, and she was essentially not growing as fast as her brother, and she died a couple of weeks after being born. So we were bottle feeding her, we were doing everything that we could, but we just were not able to keep an eye on her all the time. And one morning when we went to check on the sheep, she was just there, and she had passed away during the night or gotten hit or just was not strong enough to keep going. So because of this experience, we decided that we don't want any teen pregnancies on our farm. We would much rather wait for our ewes to be a little bit older, and also because we're not here to make a ton of profit on this farm, we're not trying to push production, we can wait for them to be fully grown. And from my research, they do tend to be better moms at that second year mark or so. Now, if this was a commercial farm and we had a whole pen just for lambs that we're bottle feeding, that we're checking on all the time, then that might be a little bit different. There are definitely benefits to breeding early because you do get more lambs faster and your flock can grow faster. Now, because when you breed your sheep is so dependent on grass and grazing, I want you to watch the next video in this series, which is all about how to do rotational grazing the right way and how to create a pasture map so you always have amazing pasture for your sheep.
And if this is your first time breeding sheep and having a lambing season, congratulations, you are in for so much cuteness.